I welcome members to this morning's committee meeting. Can I advise members of the need to maintain social distancing during the meeting and also to provide a brief overview of the day's business. The committee today will consider subordinate legislation and a departmental briefing and update on planning. Can I advise members that due to the witnesses and some members joining the meeting remotely, it would be helpful if members use the hand up icon to register that they wish to ask questions at each agenda item. Also, if those joining remotely could mute their mic when they are not speaking, that would allow everyone to hear the evidence and follow the meeting. Members will know last week we did have some considerable trouble with our online audience, so I suppose it's something that we're looking into to try, and I appreciate members that have come along here this morning because we're trying to be as prudent and as efficient as possible, and for us to effectively scrutinise the department and officials. I think it's becoming a case where it is more beneficial if we can to be here in person, albeit I know that's not possible for everyone. So I thank members for their indulgence in coming along this morning. Can I also advise members that the room must be vacated by 1 o'clock at the latest, and I request that members keep that in mind when asking questions. So agenda item number 1, which is apologies. I don't have any. I think members that were maybe due to be with us have joined online. So no apologies. Chairperson's business, agenda item number 2. I have none in front of me. And agenda item number 3, which is draft minutes. Can I turn members' attention to page 6, draft minutes of the meeting on the 6th of October 2021. Are members content that the minutes are a true and accurate reflection? Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed? Okay. Now I'll go to agenda item number 4, which is matters arising from the meeting. Can I turn members' attention to page 18, which is matters arising from the meeting on the 6th of October 2021. And can I ask members if they have any issues arising from the meeting? Patrick, you did email me personally to suggest that you did. Do you wish to talk about that, or are you happy to move on?
Chair.
Sorry, I've asked Patrick.
He can't hear. The audio isn't after messaging me.
Pardon?
He can't
Chair,
hear.
I can't hear the system.
Well, neither of them can.
I can't hear you.
Okay. Well, we'll try to sort that out before we go any further. Okay. Could I ask members, please, if you could leave Starleaf and re-enter to see if that sorts, and we'll hold pause until you come back into the meeting.
Chair, that's just so now I can hear my.
Okay. So I'll just check. I'll just check. Cahill, you can hear me? Yes.
Yes, Chair.
Okay. George Robinson, you can hear me?
Yes, I can, Chair. Yes.
Yeah, and we'll wait for Patrick to rejoin the meeting. He's rejoined now. He's in the audience. We'll bring him into the spotlight. Okay, Patrick, are you hearing me now at the committee?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can indeed. Did you hear my initial question? Obviously, where it matters arising. I know you had personally emailed me in relation to an item. Do you wish to raise that under matters arising?
Yes, I do. I just wanted to bring up the fact that when officials come in, obviously from the department, I think that it's really important that we treat them with respect. I think that it's obviously last week, there were incidents with connectivity and difficulties around that. But at the end of the day, those people are coming in to do a job. I think it's really important that particularly as a committee and as elected reps that we show everyone we meet respect. I think that the officials were showing far from that last week, and I do want to raise that. Obviously, I raised that at the end of last week's committee meeting, but I want to put that on the record today. And I think moving forward, we need to make sure that when we are inviting people in, that we remember our role and our responsibility as members.
Okay, thank you for that. I would just say in relation to that, Patrick, I'm not aware of any issues that you have raised in relation to the presentation with officials. Firstly, it is our job as members, yes, to be courteous, but also to be robust in our questioning surrounding some of these important matters pertaining to the department. What I will say is that I do agree with you that it is important that we're courteous at all times with officials. You will remember, and other members that were present will know, that it was an extremely difficult presentation with signal. which meant for members that were participating in the meeting, it was almost impossible at times to get over a point and to have a coherent answer because of the difficulties via Starleaf. I think that's. Hold on 1 minute, please. I think that's accepted by our both members here and indeed the Assembly officials in looking into that. You did raise the points at the end of the meeting. The points that you raised outside of the meeting were not of the business of the committee because it wasn't raised within the committee. And if you wish to pursue that, there is other means open to you to do that. But I am not aware of any issues that happened during the meeting that would cause me undue alarm. So before I allow you to respond on that, is there any other member that wishes to speak? It's an issue that's new to me, but if members wish to have a comment on it. Roy.
I understand that the email may refer to myself. I've always endeavoured to be courteous, but nevertheless, if I think I need to be robust with officials to seeking out information, I've always been so. I hope that the member perhaps understands that there is a duty on MLAs to ensure that they get answers and presses issues courteously but forcefully, and I endeavour to do so.
Okay, thank you, Roy. Before I bring Patrick back in, is there any other member in the room wishing to comment on this, Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. Just about the technology issue, last week was it was a nightmare, and we do need to find better ways of being able to do the committee meetings, because that's not the first time. Yeah. It's not a reflection of the staff in the committee or anything else. This is technology, but you know, it was very audible, so it was.
Total agreement, Andrew. I think it was the most difficult meeting and very difficult to chair as well because there's so much going on. I'll go to, if Patrick wants to come in now, or Cathal has a question first, and you can come back and respond at the end of all, Patrick, since it was your complaint. So I'll go to Cathal and then go to Patrick.
Yeah, Chair, I would agree with you. I mean, certainly we have a role, obviously, to scrutinise, but I mean, there's a fine line between being robust and just crossing that line, because as you know, many of us who's had working relationships with the departmental officials down through the years, so I think it's just something we need to keep a wee eye on. I mean, you know, some I thought it veered a wee bit last week, but I mean, I understand where I come from in terms of trying to get answers, so we have to get that fine line right between being robust, scrutinising and showing a wee bit of respect as well, to be fair, Chair.
And I will say that the only time in which Mr. Beggs, in my opinion, raised his voice was actually to communicate to me that he could not hear officials on the line, which was a point actually I think that all members were struggling with in the meeting. But again, I'll allow Patrick now to come in to have a comment on this, and then I'm moving on. Go on ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, it actually, obviously, as I mentioned, there were the issues around connectivity. It wasn't at that point that I was talking about. It was actually when the questioning of the officials took place. The connectivity was one issue, and this was totally distinct from that. It was around the question, and I agree totally with Mr. Beggs. You know, we do need to be robust, and our role in the committee is to scrutinise and to make sure that the department is working as best as they can, and that the officials are doing that. I think that, as Cathal mentioned, there is that fine line, and what we need to make sure that we're doing is to show some decorum and to show some manners, because in our role in the Assembly, I think that last week it did very, very much, in my opinion, I was very uncomfortable with how the officials were spoken to. I wouldn't ever think that anybody in the committee, I would hope that they wouldn't be spoken to like that, and I do think that an apology is owed to those officials, because there's a difference between being robust and scrutinising and actually just being quite abusive to the officials. So I do think that, you know, the distinction needs to be made here, and, you know, I'm very happy that other members have their opinion on that as well.
Okay, thank you for that. I think the point is on the record. There is obviously a difference of opinion about how members interacted, but you're entitled to put your opinion on the record, and at this stage I'm now moving on. So thank you for that, and thank you, members. Could I bring members' attention to page 23, which is outstanding committee requests for information. At page 3, tabled at page 3, can I advise members that advise members agreed to seek information on the cost of provisional driving licence. It was Liz Kimmins that had raised this point, and you will see a response has been tabled and provided for members. If members have any comments on that, please do speak now, or we will move on. Okay. So you will see there, obviously, the Assembly researcher noted the request and has advised that all UK applications are made via the DVLA, and the same cost applies across the 4 regions. It is £34 online and £43 if you apply via a post office. Okay? Thank you, members. Could I move on to agenda item number 5, which is correspondence? Can I draw members' attention to correspondence memo at page 39 of your packs? Okay, members. So at page 80, members' response from the Minister for Infrastructure relating to the committee meeting on the 22nd of September. Can I ask, is any members anything they wish to raise from that particular document, or is the committee content with the actions as suggested in the correspondence memo? Members are content. Okay. Thank you, members. We will move on to agenda item number 6, which, sorry, I'll just pause at that stage. Sorry, members aren't picking me up on the mic. Sorry about that. Okay, could I also bring members' attention then to agenda item number 6, which is subordinate legislation, SL1s not subject to assembly procedure. Can I advise members that there is one proposal for a statutory rule not subject to assembly proceedings at page 90. At page 90, the SL1, the Road Races Ulster Rally Order, Northern Ireland 2021. Are members content with the proposals for the statutory rule? Content? Content. Thank you, members. Can I bring your attention now to agenda item number 7, which is subordinate legislation, SRs not subject to assembly procedure. Can I advise members that there are 2 statutory rules not subject to assembly proceedings? There have been no changes to policy content since the SL1s were considered by the committee. At page 93 of your pack, SR 2021-279, the one-way traffic Ballinure Order Northern Ireland 2021. At page 96, SR 2021-280, the parking places on roads and waiting restrictions Dungannon Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2021. Can I advise members to note that the statutory rules, unless they have any issues to raise on the proposals, are members content with the statutory rules as stands? Content?
Yes.
Content.
Thank you, members. Okay, we will now move on to our substantial briefing for the meeting, which is a briefing on planning. Can I turn members' attention to a couple of documents before we do so? So at page 102, which is the Departmental Briefing paper. At page 107, which is the Department for Infrastructure review of hydrocarbon development policy. At page 110, the Mid-Ulster District Council response to strategic planning guidance. At page 5, the Rural Community Network response to regional planning guidance. At page 8, the Ulster Farmers Union response to regarding regional planning guidance. At page 16, the Armagh City, Banbridge and Craigavon Council response regarding regional planning guidance, and at page 17 the Derry and Strabane Council response regarding regional planning guidance. I think this is good that we have got such substantial responses from our local district councils, which will help inform the meeting, because no doubt that will be a topic of conversation. Roy, do you want to come in at this stage?
I just want to declare an interest that my dad is a member of the Ulster Farmers Union and I own 25 acres of agricultural land.
Okay. Thank you for that, Roy. So we will also bear in mind, members, that Hansard will be recording the meeting, and at this stage can I welcome attending via Starleaf Mr. Angus Kerr, Director of Regional Planning, Mrs. Joy Hargey, Principal Planning Officer, Planning Policy, and Mr. Philip McGowan, Principal Planning Officer, Planning Policy. Can I welcome all 3 of you to today's committee? And at this stage, could I hand over to, I think it's maybe Angus leading off, to brief the committee. Thank you, sir. Apologies, Angus, but we're not hearing you at the committee. Are you on mute? Technology.
Technology.
Angus, could I maybe suggest that if you drop out of the meeting and come back in, you might enable us to hear you. We're not hearing anything, Angus, at present. So,
Chair, can I check?
Philip, we can hear
Chair,
you. Yes.
You're Philip, yeah. So it's just Angus is the problem. Joy, can we hear you?
Yes.
Can you hear me okay, Chair?
We can hear you both very, very clearly. It's just we weren't picking Angus up, and also his visual image was quite grainy as well, whereas we're seeing and hearing you both very clearly.
Okay. Chair, if it would help, Angus was going to do an opening address with your agreement. Perhaps if it helps committee, if I were to do that whilst he's dealing with his difficulties.
We're happy with that, but we would like you to note, Philip, that the committee has been having some digital problems over this past while, and that's why we did request for officials to attend in person. If possible. I know you've declined that invite, but I see Angus.
Can anybody hear me?
Sorry, Angus, do you want to repeat?
Is that coming across now?
Yes, that's fine now. Okay, so we'll not use that contingency plan. We'll go with Angus, and he can give his opening address.
Apologies for that, joys of technology. But listen, thank you, Chair, for the invitation to attend today's committee meeting to provide an update and in particular to brief members on the recently issued planning advice note entitled Implementation of Strategic Planning Policy on Development in the Countryside, which I'm just going to refer to for the meeting as the PAN. I would also like to update members on the review of the Implementation of the Planning Act and to comment on both the Strategic Planning Policy review on renewable and low carbon energy and also the Minister's recently announced decision to review strategic planning policy on oil and gas development. As you've said, I'm joined today by my colleagues Philip McGowan and Joy Hardy, and we're of course happy to deal with any questions members may have after just this short opening statement. So members will be aware that the two-tier planning system came into operation in April 2015. Councils are responsible therefore for the majority of planning decisions and for local plan making and enforcement. However, the Department retains responsibility for the determination of regionally significant development applications, planning legislation, regional planning policy and guidance. The two-tier planning system enables councils to interpret and apply strategic policy as set out in the Strategic Planning Policy Statement, which I'll just call the SPPS, for their areas through their local development plan and also through their development management decision-making responsibilities. This has empowered local government to meet the needs and aspirations of local communities, taking account of the particular context and circumstances which they face in their areas. The interpretation, relevance and weight to be afforded to strategic planning policy is for the responsible planning authority to decide and justify, and this may result in some variations across local councils. However, it's also important for the integrity of the planning system that the wider regional policy objectives set by the Department are maintained across Northern Ireland. The Department has a number of powers which enable it to monitor the operation of planning matters across the region by councils. These include powers in relation to scrutiny of council prepared local development plans, powers to call in planning applications, reserve enforcement powers which are intended to be used in exceptional circumstances. The Department holds a central role in this two-tier planning system with both powers and functions to influence decision-making practices, monitor performance against regional objectives and formulate future policy, and bring forward guidance and advice to assist with the effective and efficient operation of the two-tier system. The Department regularly engages with councils and other stakeholders to understand how the system is working and to assist with its operation. This includes, for example, engaging with councils on a broad range of planning issues through the Strategic Planning Group meeting, which takes place quarterly with heads of planning. The Department's interest in exercising its powers is not to interfere with the Council's right and responsibility to take its own decisions, but rather to safeguard against systemic risks to the achievement of the Department's regional planning objectives. So on the 2nd of August, Minister Mallon issued a planning advice note PAN for the implementation of strategic planning policy development in the countryside, as set out in the department's SPPS. You will recall the SPPS was published on the 28th of September 2015 following extensive engagement during its preparation, including public consultation, Assembly and Environment Committee scrutiny, and the Executive Committee's agreement to its publication in final form. Following the publication of the SPPS, the Department issued a call for evidence in March 2016 to help inform the scope of a potential review of strategic planning policy for development in the countryside. This attracted responses from a wide range of interests, including local government, environmental groups, business industry, residents groups, professional bodies, and individuals. The Department also procured consultants in March 2017 to undertake research and provide an updated evidential context to inform the best strategic planning policy approach for development in the countryside. This research involved focused stakeholder engagement, including seminars with council planning managers, professional institutions and environmental interest groups. It also included individual meetings with relevant organisations, including local political representatives, the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, Construction Employers Federation, the Department for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, Rural Community Network, and the Ulster Farmers Union. The preparatory work and engagement helped inform the Minister's decision on her preferred way forward for strategic planning policy on development in the countryside, and her decision to issue the PAN rather than commence a fundamental review of policy in this area. I can advise members that the Minister is satisfied that the current policy approach provided by the SPPS remains appropriate, robust and fit for purpose for the two-tier planning system, but she also recognises that there are a number of challenges with its application and interpretation. The Minister has therefore brought forward the PAN to seek to address these issues and reaffirm her commitment to sustainable development in the countryside. The purpose of the advice note is to re-emphasise fundamental aspects of the existing strategic planning policy as contained in the SPPS, and to clarify certain extant provisions of it. Members will be aware that the established fundamental core of the regional policy approach is to cluster, consolidate and group new development with existing established buildings and promote the reuse of previously used buildings. The PAN is intended to assist in ensuring a consistent interpretation of this policy, which will have a positive impact on the planning system overall and on rural communities. It is important to be clear that the PAN does not change or add to strategic planning policy on development in the countryside. Rather, the PAN re-emphasises the fundamental aspects of the existing policy and clarifies certain provisions of it, including integration and rural character, dwellings on farms policy, infill urban development, and dwellings in existing clusters. The PAN is intended to assist planning authorities and all users of the planning system in the interpretation and implementation of this important policy area. I know members have asked why the committee was not consulted on the PAN prior to it being issued, and it would not be normal practice to consult with the Infrastructure Committee on planning guidance and advice of the nature of the PAN. However, a DALO letter on the PAN issued to the committee on the 3rd of August for information of members. As to the implementation of the PAN, it is important to remember that it is advice and not new policy. Therefore, it would not have the same weight as that new policy would. Ultimately, though, its interpretation, as well as the relevance and the weight to be accorded to it in decision-taking and plan-making, remains a matter for councils as planning authorities in their own right. It is recognised that there has been a generally negative reaction to the PAN since it was introduced, as evidenced by some concerns expressed in the media and through correspondence to the department, including correspondence from the Ulster Farmers Union, several councils and a small number of planning agents. Given that the PAN is of interest to all local councils, I have contacted NILGA, offering to attend a future briefing and discuss the PAN with its members. Senior DFI planning officials have also engaged regularly with council heads of planning through the strategic planning group meetings to discuss strategic planning issues, including issues such as those set out in the PAN. As I've said, the Minister is fully committed to ensuring that her department and the wider planning system continue to play their part in managing growth to achieve appropriate and sustainable patterns of development in the countryside that contributes to vibrant rural community and economy. Minister Mallon firmly believes that the SPBS does and should continue to provide opportunities for farming families, other rural dwellers and sustainable development in the countryside in general, striking a balance between supporting and sustaining rural communities and protecting the countryside from inappropriate development. This plan should assist in this overall objective. The Minister will continue to consider current and emerging issues such as climate emergency to ensure that strategic planning policy for development in the countryside is fit for purpose. Members will be aware that the Assembly motion on the impact of the Department for Infrastructure's planning guidance on rural communities has been scheduled by the Business Committee for Tuesday the 19th of October. Just briefly turning now to policy work that we are doing in the Department, which I mentioned at the start. Members will be aware of the Infrastructure Minister's announcement on the 21st of April regarding a review of strategic planning policy for renewable and low carbon energy. Planning officials have been progressing the necessary work in line with established policy, making best practice. The Department intends to undertake engagement with key stakeholders, including industry representatives this autumn. Furthermore, on the 27th of September, the Minister announced a review of strategic planning policy on oil and gas development, including development involving fracking. The purpose of these reviews is to ensure the Department's planning policy remains up to date, robust and fit for purpose. I also want to provide a brief update on the separate legislative work we are taking forward on the review of the implementation of the Planning Act. Members will recall that the briefing provided to the committee on the 23rd of June on the responses to the call for evidence and review of the implementation of the Act. As you will be aware, the focus of the review is on the implementation of the legislative provisions of the Act itself and the extent to which the original objectives of the Act have been achieved. This will then inform whether there is a need to retain, amend or repeal any provisions of the Act. The call for evidence sought to target and engage with key stakeholders in the planning system, including councils, statutory consultees, professional bodies, community, business and environmental interests, although it was open to anyone to respond. The review will also provide an opportunity to consider any improvements or fixes which can be made to the Planning Act or to subordinate legislation underneath it. There is no doubt also that issues with the planning system that have surfaced as a result of the pandemic will be considered as part of this review. This may not always require legislative change. Officials have had initial discussions with the Minister as to her priorities and next steps. Her focus is very much on how we can speed up the system, both development plan preparation and application processing, while improving the system for all stakeholders. The Department continues to work through the responses to the call for evidence and aims to finalise the review report for the Minister later this year. The Department will also write to the committee before the review is published. Finally, the review report will also reflect on any potential legislative amendments which may arise from parallel work the Department's engaged in to improve the planning system through the Planning Forum and the Planning Engagement Partnership. Members will be aware that the Planning Forum is a cross-government group working in collaboration with central and local government to focus on the role, particularly of statutory consultees, on improving processes and timeframes for dealing with major and economically significant applications. And the Planning Engagement Partnership, which was set up last October, is looking at how to enhance the quality and depth of community engagement in the planning process at both regional and local levels and help to improve the planning system experience for those users and stakeholders. Partnership is in its final stages of preparing a report for the Minister. So hopefully that, Chair, thank you for that, and that's hopefully a helpful overview of some of the work that's going on the planning side at the moment, and also a more detailed view of the plan as well. I'm more than happy to take questions. Okay,
thank you, Angus, for your presentation. Obviously, members will have some very detailed questions on a lot of the content. I suppose to begin with, there's quite a bit of interest in this meeting today. There's quite a lot of frustrations out there, both with end users and indeed the planning world as to this current system and the frustrations that it provides. Some of the key and constant running themes that I'm certainly picking up on, and as our members, are slow decision making, inconsistent application of planning policy, excruciatingly slow statutory consultee response times, poor communication from planning officials, officers to applicants and agents, and little or no accountability for our performance. We have a situation where in Northern Ireland we have some regionally significant planning applications which have been in the system, some over 200 weeks. So can I ask you, do you believe that this is an attractive prospect for inward investment in Northern Ireland? And if not, is the planning process fit for purpose?
Well, I think you've probably got a flavour there of the work that the department is involved in at the moment to try and improve the planning system, and there's no doubt that all planning systems, I think, and I'm lucky enough to get the opportunity to sort of see the planning systems in operation in some of the other jurisdictions. They all have issues and complexities. It's a contested area where there's always room for improvement, and I suppose that's why the department and the minister has really focused very much on trying to bring forward the work of the review of the implementation of the Act, which is a really good opportunity to sort of make some changes and improvements to the legislative framework that shapes the system, but also working on other areas as well. The Planning Forum, which is an opportunity to bring the key leaders from all the statutory consultees for the system together, along with representatives from councils and ourselves in the department to work through a series of actions which have emerged from an independent report that are focused on trying to improve those processing times, but particularly trying to improve the role of the statutory consultees in that process. And I mean, there's other areas of work as well that are going forward. At the moment, I touched on the planning engagement partnership, which is to try and enhance that sort of community engagement aspect of planning, to try and allay some of the frustrations and concerns that we hear about the system, where it can sometimes be complex and opaque and difficult to understand for those feeding into it, and the work that's been going on that sort of partnership has been really positive in trying to look at ways of actually improving that, and without actually having to make significant changes. But again, that will also feed into the review of the implementation of the Act. And I suppose the other maybe couple of areas to highlight, Chair, in relation to some of the work on addressing those issues that you've raised, is that we are taking work forward with our partners in local government on a new shared regional IT system for the planning system in Northern Ireland, which I think will make a big difference. Those who have used the planning portal at the moment do express quite a few frustrations about it being sort of old, outdated, not that intuitive, and sometimes difficult to navigate. The system we're getting in now, there's an awful lot of work going on this at the moment to bring it in for next year. Is much more modern, up to date. It allows applications to be made online. And generally will speed up the system, I think, quite significantly in that way. And I suppose the final point, I think I've mentioned to committee before, there is as well a Northern Ireland Audit Office review at the moment, looking at the planning system, which I understand is not too far away from being finalised. And I think that will also be very interesting to get that sort of audit, if you like, independent perspective on both the local government aspects of the system and also the central government, DFI, part of it as well. So I'm not saying things are perfect. They're certainly not. There's room for improvement, but I hope I've managed to sort of give you a sense of the huge amount of work that we are doing to try and improve the system and to make sure it plays a really fundamental part of the recovery from the pandemic and addressing many of the challenges that we face today, like climate change.
Okay, well look, I accept that no system is perfect, but the consistent evidence shows that Northern Ireland vastly underperforms in terms of its planning process, targets set by the department when compared with other regional assemblies and indeed across these isles. So, you know, we all know what the problems are. You've accepted that some of these problems are well known to you and officials. So can I ask, do you accept responsibility, and do you accept that Northern Ireland vastly underperforms compared to those other jurisdictions? What I'm being told, and indeed what members are laying to me as well, is that there's plenty of talk about reform in relation to the planning process. There's been plenty of reviews and plenty of working groups set up to address it, but very little in terms of action. We're not reinventing the wheel. The issues that have existed for time elapsed since I've come into politics are still issues which are affecting the planning process today. There's nothing more frustrating to members and indeed to those that are looking towards Northern Ireland for inward investment than a planning process that is both bureaucratic and not meeting its targets. So it's stifling economic investment. There has to be a robust plan put in place, but not just talked about, because planning reviews that have went on, subsequently over time, and this continuing to roll out now, and we welcome the fact that we will be reviewing the current Planning Act, but there is a recognition that it's been slow. So what I would like to just say before you go on to your next point is, will this be time focused? Can we give confidence and reassurance to both agents and applicants that we're going to get a grip of the current backlogs, and in particular, what possible solutions do you or the department have in mind to address the real problem that we have with statutory consultees running down the clock on applications, further stifling them, and coming back after whatever it could be 60 plus days to ask for further information, which delays further?
Chair, well, I mean, it's not a straightforward issue in a sense. There's no one single thing, I think, that causes delays in the planning process. The statutory consultation issue is a key one, and it's one that we're certainly, as you've heard, are putting a lot of attention into. But there are many other issues that impact on the way the planning system works, both at council and central government level, ranging from resources, complex applications, insufficient quality and information submitted with applications, a range of different issues, and all of which we're looking.
Sorry, Angus, we're not hearing you. Angus, the committee's not hearing you online. Okay, we've cut out completely. I'll suspend the meeting.
I'm signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound.
Okay, members, we are live again. Everyone's coming into the spotlight that are joining online. Okay, I'm seeing Joy, and I'm not seeing Angus, but I'm seeing his screen, and Philip McGowan. Okay, there's Angus back now. Okay, so firstly I'm going to do a sound check. So Joy, can you hear me?
Yes, Chair, I can hear you, thanks.
Okay, Angus, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, and Philip, can you hear us at the committee?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. Listen, that's as an apology on our side. Starleaf, the assembly system crashed, but we're back live again, and we will continue on with our briefing session. Okay, so look, I'm going to draw a line. You know the frustrations that I put across. Hopefully that's reflected in the review and the working going forward to try and address some of the issues. And I want to move on to the issue of the PAN. Okay? So you mentioned that quite extensively in your briefing document, and you will know that as a committee we have had quite a considerable number of responses in relation to the PAN, all bar one of a negative nature and the other one not passing an opinion. So look, I'm going to go through a series of questions here, Angus, and I would appreciate if you could be brief on the points, because it will help develop where I'm coming from on it. So firstly, you did say in your statement why the PAN was introduced. You mentioned that it was to clarify policy. So can I ask, do you agree that the PAN not only clarifies, but in some aspects and respects changes the policy?
No.
Okay. Well, let's take what you say as clarification then of the policy on infill dwellings and ribbon development CTY 8 of PPS 21. Do you agree that policy CTY 8 makes no distinction between different types of buildings?
I think the important point to say is that the policy, the plan that we've put out is clarifying policy in the SPPS, which is linking very much to those four areas which I've talked about: the integration and rural character, the dwellings on farms, infill ribbon development, and also dwellings in existing clusters. And we're simply clarifying what the interpretation of that policy is and the application of it.
Okay, so you've said clarification, but do you agree that the policy CTY 8 makes no distinction between different types of building?
I haven't got CTY 8 in front of me at the moment, and I mean, I think the point that I'm making is that the PAN is trying to clarify how the policy in the SPPS works.
Okay,
in relation to that issue, in relation to the infill and ribbon.
Okay, well, I find that disappointing as the Chief Planning Officer that we're discussing the PAN and you don't have the specific policy in CTY 8 in front of you, but I'll move on. Do you agree that the PAN now seeks to exclude from the term building certain types of building, such as a domestic garage or a small outbuilding?
I think that it clarifies that. It clarifies that point.
Okay, so that's a yes then.
I think the PAN does cover that issue. Yes.
So is that not a change in policy?
No, it's not. It's just a clarification on what the original intent of the policy was.
But do you agree that it will certainly feel like a change for any constituent, or indeed any of these issues in which local councils have raised, who applied on or before the 1st of August under CTY 8 in reliance upon a domestic garage or small outbuilding, which actually accounts for quite a number of rural applicants?
Well, I mean, if there's a planning application in with a council for a single dwelling based around those issues, it's an assessment that will be made by the council planning authority. which will be based on the policy and the PAN and any other material planning considerations. So the weight to be attributed to the PAN, which is a guidance note and an advice note, is a matter for the individual planning authority.
Okay, well, what is a small outbuilding in any event? Can you take me to a section within the PAN where it's defined? And do you consider there to be an adequate definition of this in the PAN?
I mean, I can't take you to anything in the PAN that's not in the PAN. I mean, you presumably will have read it and will understand all that it says about that particular issue. There's no sort of section defining it in any place.
Well, you know, it's been interpreted, and not just by me, but indeed by many of the local authorities, that we have a change because what is now constituting a building has changed in relation to this guidance note. Do you agree that if the PAN changes policy, then it ought to have been subject to a public consultation prior to its publication?
Yes.
So you do. So if it is the case that a plan ought to have been the subject of public consultation, do you believe that the call for evidence fulfilled that?
Yes, I mean, I do believe that the call for evidence was a valid public consultation exercise, looking at the issues of strategic importance around the policy for dwellings in the countryside.
But see, this is an interesting point because the call for evidence was not actually a consultation on the draft PAN. So why, therefore, do you feel it constituted an adequate consultation?
Because I think it was an adequate consultation for the purposes of what it was intended to do. I didn't say that it was a public consultation directly on the PAN, for which there's no need because it's not a change of policy, it's guidance or advice note.
Okay, so let's look at the call for evidence. The call for evidence took place 5.5 years ago. Can you tell me a single document published by DFI which relied upon a consultation, or in this case, as you've clarified, a call for evidence which took place over 5.5 years previously? I'm not aware of one. Maybe you can point me.
Yeah, no, I mean, no, I can't. I think that the point here is that the PAN is not policy. It is advice, which wouldn't require consultation. So that's not something that we're relying on or saying.
But this is the evidence in which you're relying upon in relation to introducing the PAN. So it seems to me as quite disturbing that the department is relying on a document or a call for evidence over 5.5 years old. What steps have DFI taken to bring the input by the public in 2016 up to date in this matter? Because there's a lot has changed in the world and realm of planning from 2016. We have the vast experience now of the introduction of planning to local authorities and their experiences. And if we look at the responses that we've received as a committee, overwhelmingly, any council that has had any interaction with CTY8 of PPS 21 are seeing this as a change of policy, but yet the department say it is not.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what I'm saying. We do not view the advice note as a change of policy. It is an advice note similar to other advice notes that we have issued in the past, which would not be consulted on and is merely clarifying and explaining the policy.
So have DFI
not be subject to consultation?
Okay, apologies for cutting across you, but have DFI taken any input from the public or local authorities from that 2016 document since that?
Well, the department has been working, as I've said, closely with councils, throughout the process really of the transfer of planning and the creation of the new two-tier planning system. So a lot of work has been done in monitoring the system and understanding what's happening, liaising with councils, heads of planning, etc., to try and understand how the system is working. But there has been no direct public consultation on this PAN.
Okay, and I'll finish it there, but it's fair to say that I believe that there's major questions surrounding this plan, why it was introduced in the time that it was, the lack of public engagement from the 2016 consultation, and indeed the varied interpretation of its application. So I would say that I do think major questions surround this, and it's something that the Department will have to look at, in my opinion, and indeed many within this committee, going forward. I know it is scheduled for a debate. There will be further conversation by the committee following this meeting today as to an action that we might deem satisfactory going forward. But thank you for answering my questions, and I'll now move to members who may wish to take up some of those points. So firstly, I have Andrew on my list, followed by Liz, followed by Dolores, and then Cahill.
Thank you, Chair, and I've got a couple of questions. Apologies if this is quite detailed, quite lengthy, but these are detailed issues, and it's important to give them the proper airing and also the consideration of the complexity that it deserves. So I'll start with probably the easiest one, which is in the review of the 2011 Planning Act. So my understanding was that we would have seen the outcome of that review by the beginning of the summer recess. Now the correspondence has been received. It's more towards the end of the year. Okay, so I'm a bit disappointed that's the case, because there's quite key issues here. So in the letter back it says officials have had discussions with the Minister as to our priorities and next steps. The Department continues to work through the responses to the call for evidence and aims to finalise the review report later this year. So the issue for me is just maybe I have an understanding of why there's been delays in relation to finalisation of this report, and also just around three things. I'm the kind of person who comes into politics focused upon solutions rather than problems. Every day we can just focus on problems, and it'll get us nowhere. We need to get solutions, and particularly in relation to the planning system, we need solutions. There's three key issues that to me are very, very apparent, and the Department needs to be taking action on, and I want an understanding of whether the Department have an appetite as part of this review to deal with it. If I leave here today with an understanding that the Department is maybe thinking about it, considering it, I'm going to leave with great despair, because we really do need to get stuck into these issues and we need to deal with them. And they're relatively simple issues. Well, the first two are relatively simple. The one's in relation to poor quality applications. We know there's applications being put into the system which aren't of the right standard, and what happens is that there's an iterative process which goes on for months, if not years, backwards and forwards, either with yourselves as a department or with district councils trying to improve the application, and it serves no one and it reflects badly upon the timescales. I think it would be important to have an understanding whether there's an appetite within the department to have a situation whereby there's a checklist or something like that to ensure that applications, when they're received, are of a sufficient standard, and if they're not, they're rejected, because it's upon the developer to ensure that they're putting in a correct application. The other one's around statutory consultees. One of the major hold-ups in applications is getting the responses from statutory consultees, and if there's further responses required, also getting those back in a timely manner. And there's a couple of key offenders, and they sit within the Department of Infrastructure, so they're within your building where the problem lies. We need to deal with this, and there's clear opportunities for action, whether there's a statutory time frame to reply or whether they get an element of the fee, because usually money motivates most people in the world, so they get an element of the fee. But we need to find a way to improve the statutory consultees, because to be honest here, Angus, if we don't do that, we're going to continue to have the planning system the way it is, and it's going to deter investment. So we really need to find a way to do that. And I know there's a working group and all the rest of it, but we can set up all the meetings and working groups that we want unless we actually have concrete interventions in relation to that. And the last one's in relation to regionally significant applications, and that's what largely the chair has quoted in terms of the timescales for those. And one of the main reasons around that is in relation to judicial reviews. Planning and judicial reviews come hand in hand here in Northern Ireland, and when a planning decision is made, you can almost put money in the bookmakers in terms of how long it's going to be before the judicial review is going to land. And it's really just in relation to whether the department has made any contribution to the Audit Office review in relation to judicial reviews, or what more you're doing, and just in context of that. Because I think yourselves are very conscious of this, and I think that stymies the decision making, because you always want to make sure that you've got it completely right, and it's right that you do the application completely right. What happens is it's heavily loaded, and there's a lot of work put into in the context of judicial reviews. So coming full circle to summarise what I'm looking for answers on: why is it taking so long? What are we going to do about poor quality applications? What about statutory consultees? Is there any practical stuff that the department's going to do about that? And what about judicial reviews and the impact that's having on regionally significant applications?
Okay, so thanks for that. The delay point, I'm slightly surprised about that, because I think we were with you before the summer, and at that point in time we indicated that the target was to have the review report with the Minister by the end of the year, and that there was a process of engagement, further analysing the responses that we got, talking to the Minister, and then some stakeholder engagement as well around the review. So we're still on target for that, albeit it has been challenging. But on the three issues that you've identified, I mean, certainly the first two are certainly fairly and squarely at the heart of what it is that we're trying to do. The poor quality applications coming in point has been raised time and again. It's been raised by councils and others as being a fundamental issue with trying to speed up the system. It also impacts on your second point, which is statutory consultees, because quite often the delay around statutory consultees is because the information that's come in with the application in the first place isn't up to scratch. So one of the things that we've been focusing on, and I don't want to, it'd be wrong for me to preempt what's going to come out of the review, because that needs to go to the Minister and be agreed by the Minister, but certainly one of the key areas that we're looking at is some sort of validation checklist, which I think you were hinting at there, Andrew, which I think everybody is fairly confident would actually make a big difference. And we have a precedent in Belfast City Council where they've had one kind of on an administrative basis going for a while, and it seems to be working well, and they've given us some information on how that's been working. So that's, reassure you that that's one area that we're certainly going to be looking very, very firmly at. As indeed are we, as I've said, in terms of the statutory consultee role, where there's a huge amount of work going on, and work that's already being kind of developed, if you like, through the planning forum, and will also further flow into the review of the implementation of the Act. Some of it's quite simple stuff about, communication between statutory consultees and councils, standing advice that is available, so that councils don't have to necessarily consult and keep reconsulting. Principles around how what the role of the statutory consultee and the planning authorities will be in relation to consultation. Advice as well on the role of the statutory consultees, if you like, throughout the process of planning from cradle to grave, and also work as well on the sort of pre-application stage, which is critical to trying to speed up processing times. But there, as I said earlier, there are so many different factors in terms of what we need to do to speed up the. It's not just statutory consultees, and you alluded to the culture that we have in Northern Ireland of taking a long time over getting applications over the line and enabling them to be approved. They don't do that in the other jurisdictions, and I am fearful of comparisons with other jurisdictions, because I know they have different systems and different processes and different ways of measuring performance. Certainly when I meet them, they raise the same issues with their systems as get raised with our systems in terms of delays and so on. But there's no doubt they are much more hard-nosed, if that's the right expression, in relation to applications which just aren't acceptable. Rather than spending time, working with agents and developers to try and get them to a point where they're acceptable, they just simply refuse them, or offer the developer an opportunity to have it to have the application withdrawn, and then the performance statistics reflect that approach. So that's a cultural point, again, which is in the mix. The judicial review point is, that's really a matter, I suppose, for the Department of Justice and the courts, and it's very difficult for us in the planning side to significantly influence that. Our focus on that is trying to do things right, and that's exercising us at council level and at departmental level. Crossing the I's, dotting the T's, getting legal advice before we take decisions and so on. And that's just the reality of where we are in the planning system in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, just one thing around, I understand that, around the statutory consultees, I do welcome your responses, but as part of the review, will there be consideration to sort of more radical stuff in terms of statutory response times for statutory consultees, or financial incentives for them? Is that on the table?
Those are matters which have been raised by a number of respondents into the review, and they're being looked at and considered. I can't sort of preempt what Minister will be deciding on some of those things, but certainly they're in there and they will be considered.
Okay. And also the Audit Office review of planning, the outcome of that is due very soon. Will that be reflected within the review of the Planning Act, or will that be dealt with separately?
If timing allows, we will, yes. It just depends on when the outcome of that is known.
Okay. Just a couple of other questions. Obviously there's a review in relation to renewable energy, and there's a number of other reviews going on, and it's important that they're given consideration here today. That review is largely to be welcomed, but there's a concern around the timescales, how long that will take. There's creating a degree of uncertainty within the industry, because people don't know whether to proceed with projects because they don't know whether the goalposts are going to be changed. Just have an understanding, is there a real sense of urgency being given to that review in relation to renewable energy, and what plans there are to consult with the industry?
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of work going on in that area, and we do intend to consult with the industry over the coming weeks. And I think, as we've said before, the plan is to try and get a consultation document out before the end of this financial year.
Okay. Just one more question. I'm probably pushing my luck here in relation to this. Okay, it's in relation to the PAN and PPS 21. I know that's already been raised by the chair, but in one of the letters, I think it was from the DALO or from the Minister, it stated, ultimately the interpretation, relevance and weight to be accorded to all material planning considerations, including this advice, which is the PAN, will be a matter for each planning authority to determine in any individual case. So you have issued the PAN. How, if your view is that the PAN isn't being met, how would you intend to enforce that?
Well, I mean, it's like any of the sort of policies and advice and guidance that the department puts out there, whether it's regional development strategy, SPPS, or advice notes like this one that we're talking about today. The way the planning system works is that they are interpreted and weighed as material considerations by the local planning authority, and they then take a decision, and that's the nature of the new two-tier system and handing those powers over to council. So, it's not the case that we would be enforcing those decisions or making those decisions from the department's point of view. All we can do is put out the policy and advice, and it's a matter then for councils to consider those. And I suppose, as I said earlier, there's a kind of a hierarchy of policy with the SPPS, central to that. And this is just an advice note, which would sit underneath the policy.
One really last short brief question. I'm generally well behaved. Is two of the key concerns that have came through to us is in relation to the financing for new homes and also health and safety. They're the two sort of key things that have came through, amongst others. Are you hearing those concerns, and how much weight do you afford to those?
Yeah, we are aware of concerns. The Ulster Farmers Union actually in recent correspondence to the department raised those concerns, and the minister is actually writing or is just about to write to, if not already gone out actually. I'm looking at Joy there. I'm not sure if it's actually
it has gone out already. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to raise those issues with Finance UK, which kind of are responsible for it used to be the old Council of Mortgage Lenders, just to raise those matters with them and to impress upon them the importance of looking at the planning context within Northern Ireland, which is different around rural planning than it is in the other jurisdictions. Obviously there's a lot more development and houses in the countryside here, and often quite in close proximity to farms because of the policy.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. I'll go to Liz now, please, and then to Dolores.
Chair. Thanks, Angus. I suppose my questions are largely around the PAN, and I mean, just from the outset, I'll lead on from the Chair's issues he raised in relation to the view that he feels is a policy change. I mean, I certainly would share those concerns, because I mean, around the point around what constitutes a dwelling and a domestic garage only. I mean, legally a group can be two, and it's now, from my interpretation of this, not possible to obtain planning permission for a house on a farm with an ancillary building. So surely that is a policy change. I mean, would you agree that not all farmers have existing farm buildings on a farm? So I would like to hear how a farmer can now obtain permission for a new farm dwelling on his farm when the siting of the new proposed dwelling can now not be read along with a group of buildings which constitute a dwelling or domestic garage only. I mean, that's certainly an issue that was being raised with us, and that's my interpretation of it.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. It sort of disappeared out there in terms of the question. Apologies.
Sorry, no, I was just saying that, I mean, around the point about a group of buildings which constitutes a dwelling and a domestic garage only. I mean, I would share the concerns of the Chair that this would be a policy change, and I made the point there that, and I've asked, would you agree that not all farmers will have an existing farm buildings on a farm? So how do you propose that a farmer can obtain permission for a new dwelling on his farm when the siting of the new proposed dwelling can now not be read along with a group of buildings which constitute a dwelling or a domestic garage only? Based on what that says.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't accept that it's new policy, as I've said. The wording of the policies remain exactly the same. To visually, that dwelling must be visually linked or sited to cluster with an established group of buildings on the farm holding. Really, what we're doing here is looking at the intention of the policy and clarifying what it is, and that's in the context of the objective of the policy, which is to strike the balance between protecting the environment from inappropriate development and also supporting and sustaining rural communities, and doing that through the kind of well-established cluster, consolidate and group approach. Whenever you look at the policy and set it within that context and what it is trying to achieve, all we're doing is clarifying that the purpose of it is to make sure that there's visual linking and clustering with a group of buildings on a farm, and we're trying to clarify what we think that means.
Sure. I mean, within the briefing note, it says that this is to try and ensure consistency, but at the same time it's contradictory when it says we're leaving it down to councils to interpret that from themselves. So, I mean, I can't get my head around it at all. In my experience, planning in rural areas is extremely difficult to obtain as it is, and this is going to further restrict rural dwellers from getting planning permission. I mean, I think that's fairly clear at this stage. So I mean, I would have real concerns. I mean, Mid-Ulster, for example, their planning committee stated their concerns that the PAN would prejudice their ability to progress their local development plans. So, I mean, would you agree then that the PAN directive will negatively impact upon some councils' ability to progress with their draft local plan strategies?
No, I don't think it would, because in terms of taking forward local development plans, councils are required to take account of the department's policies and guidance in bringing those forward. Depending on what stage the plan is at, there's an opportunity now for the the council to do that, and to take account of this rural policy and the plan that's clarifying certain aspects of it. And there's the flexibility within that system, as there is with decision making for the councils themselves to weigh those considerations as they see fit. And for example, as I've talked many times before here, in relation to the new two-tier system, the local development plan process is specifically designed, if you like, to allow councils to interpret some of the big regional policies to the circumstances that pertain within their area, and so therefore there will be some differences in the way that councils deal with that. So provided that's fully explained and justified by the council, whenever it's subject to independent examination and sort of soundness test. So if it's sound that a plan takes a certain course of action and there's evidence to explain why that is, then that is going to be properly investigated and handled through the independent examination. So I do think that there's an opportunity for rural planning policies that we're talking about here today to be addressed in that way. And I know from the team that are looking at the plans which are coming into the department, there's quite a few different approaches reflected in the draft plan strategy on rural policy, depending on the council area. And some councils are more rural with particular landscapes and settlement, dispersed settlement patterns and issues than others, and those tend to be reflected in those plans.
Okay, Chair, just to finish, I mean, again, I still think it's largely very contradictory, the fact that we're saying here that there was different approaches used, and yet we're still leaving it down to councils to interpret it. But I don't want to ground it. Just my last couple of points, Angus, in relation to that. I mean, was there any engagement with councils before the plan was issued? And if not, I mean, based on the concerns expressed by councils and the rural bodies such as the Ulster Farmers Union, would the department or the minister not consider withdrawing the plan until proper consultation and agreement on our way forward is reached?
Well, I mean, on the first point, there's, as I've sort of said already, there's a lot of engagement between ourselves and the council across a range of issues. And rural planning would be something we do talk about off and on, since transfer. That's part of the many planning issues that do get discussed. I don't think that, as you probably can gather, we're minded to withdraw the plan. We consider it is not a policy change, and therefore it is a positive and helpful thing that's explaining the rural policy that we have here and clarifying it so that it can be implemented more clearly and better.
Sure, just to finish on that, I mean, it's clear then there was no engagement in specifically on this plan, which I think is quite poor. And I mean, you said there, Angus, you think it's a better way. That's certainly not the feedback that we're getting, and that's not the feeling on the ground. So I mean, I would ask that the Minister and the Department reflect on that. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Liz. Go to Dolores.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Angus. Can I just pick up on the point that Andrew was making and is made within the Ulster Farmer Union submission around mortgage lending? I mean, I have currently a case where there's a large garage-type workshop and planning approval has been granted, but they can't get a mortgage because of this big workshop behind it seemed to be a commercial building. So what were you saying in relation to the Association of Mortgage Lenders in terms of the requirement, I don't know whether that requirement is in law or not, to actually pay regard to the planning policy in relation to the countryside?
Yeah, well, we've written to the Finance UK now is the name that kind of is a body that incorporates the old council of mortgage lenders, if I understand it correctly, and it's really to point out that I suspect, I mean, the issues that have been raised really to us in about that point, Dolores, and we're trying to emphasise that a flexible approach should be taken for the circumstances in Northern Ireland, where there's a lot more sort of single dwellings in the countryside and self-build mortgages and that sort of thing than you would get in the other jurisdictions where rural policy is much more restricted. Hopefully that will receive a favourable response, and we will obviously engage with them as necessary going forward. We'll see how they respond to this letter to try and address that issue.
Chair, I would welcome that the committee, is kept informed of the outcome of that letter, to the banking, because it is a problem. And another one that has been picked up, told to me by a member of the Ulster Farmers Union, is, for example, the requirement to build close to the farm buildings. Well, if it's a piggery, I don't know how many people have been downwind of a pig farm, or even a few pigs, but you wouldn't want to be clustered beside them, let me tell you. So, in terms of the type of farm activity, are there exemptions? And the other bit in around it, you have give some nod towards the needs of exceptional circumstances for care and all the rest of it. But it's not very clearly defined, and I know that the threshold is very high because, as representatives, we have made representation on behalf of constituents to the planning authority. And the other bit, Angus, and it may not be your fault, but some councils, and it's part because the executive didn't give enough resources in the transfer of functions to local councils, but many people report to me, at the end of the day, they're paying hefty planning fees, they're service users, customers therefore, and they can very often not get easy access to a planner to discuss their application. So I just wonder, I know that's digressing a wee bit, but the whole, in terms of the whole planning system, it isn't any easier just because it's within councils.
No, it's a fair point. I don't know, Angus, if you want to comment probably more on the broader point, but the other points are certainly valid for future review, particularly within that CT 21 and the building of a farm, a dwelling house as close to the farm as possible, not only with the health and safety concerns, also with young children as well. It's something that certainly comes up continually in the countryside. Angus, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, no, I agree. And health and safety matters would be part of the consideration of any of those particular cases, and it may well preclude the ability to use certain sites because of that. And maybe the point just about sort of frustrations in relation to communication and access to planners and so on. Obviously a lot of this is a matter for councils and the way the councils manage their planning departments and so on, which is a matter for them. But certainly the work I touched on earlier that we're doing in relation to kind of trying to look at ways to improve community engagement with planning, I think will help to address some of that, because part of what we're looking at there is raising awareness of the planning process, sort of much easier kind of guidance that people can kind of click onto on websites to understand the process and understand how they engage and when's the right time to engage, and if you're not hearing anything at particular times, that's normal, and so on. Because that's certainly one of the issues that's come out of that work has been just that lack of understanding with communities who are engaging in the system. So yeah, hopefully that will help a little bit in that.
But in terms of the threshold around personal circumstances, at the moment it seems to be very high for that threshold. I've been to planning meetings where people have been told, to build on. Well, under inheritance and who's going to be getting what and how things are divvied up is always a source of contention in families, but none less so, I think, in farm families. So it isn't always, it seems a very glib solution at times that some planner would be saying to the applicant, well, why don't you build an extension? It's just sometimes, and the threshold, what's the guidance within the threshold in terms of what the personal care needs are? I mean, I can give you an example. Chair, say if a young person had epilepsy, you know, a child, and the father worked in England, and if the child had a seizure at night and required hospital admission, and then there were other small children in the house, they needed a relative to be able to dash next door. Of course, yeah. That wasn't considered to be reasonable.
Angus, briefly, do you want to come back on that, please?
Well, I mean, obviously, I can't comment on specific cases, but I mean, the basic judgment that's required by the planning authority is to assess the evidence that would be there for some of those cases in relation to the requirement to have a dwelling beside the the person that needs assistance and help. And you know, if that's justified from the medical evidence and other evidence that would be provided in cases like that, then the planning authority, you know, can use that policy, if you like, facility there to be able to approve those dwellings. But you know, you're quite right, Dolores. It is a hard kind of test to get over, because it needs to be very clear that it actually required a new dwelling to meet that need. So you know, there may be other ways of dealing with the situation, and all of that will be looked into by the planning authority in looking at cases like that.
But sorry, Chair, you know, the whole point of this was to clarify consistency and interpretation, and this isn't going to, in that scenario.
A fair point, and something that we can take up. Angus has heard clearly the frustrations of Dolores Kelly in relation to that, and many others that have experienced those very difficult circumstances, and particularly whenever you're dealing with a case of need, it's always a situation whereby nobody would apply under that terminology unless there was seriously a case of need to be met. So a bit of flexibility on interpretation on that one certainly would go a long way. Could I go now, and could I ask members please to keep specific and concise, because we have a number of members to get in before we have a strategic planning. So I'll go to Cahill please online.
Chair, is that me in now?
That's you, Cahill, yes.
Thank you, Chair. And Angus, you're welcome back to the committee, but it's not a good one to come back to. But I just want to pick up on a couple of points, because I mean, and the Chair, I'll try and stay away from some of the commentary already, but I mean, it's important for people to understand the plan attacks three areas of the policy in terms of CTY 2A, 8 and 10, and they've all talked about the farm building issue is a simple one, because we all know that people got it very hard to get a mortgage if you were visually linking a house with a cluster of buildings, and for all the other reasons that's been mentioned by other members. And that's one area. The other area is obviously the infill and the gap sites, and also 2A in terms of the cluster. Because I mean, whilst Dolores has mentioned other areas of the policy, this plan doesn't attack that. Now, you're saying on one hand that it's a matter for councils to interpret the plan, and it's down to them in terms of relevance and weight. But then, in the other hand, then what you've introduced actually is additional policy tests. It may not be a change of policy in your eyes, but the way I read it, these are additional policy test measures that you're now saying to councils, this is the direction you have to go in. So we're saying, on one hand, it's up to the local authority to deal with it. It's a two-tier system. You deal with it yourselves. It's your autonomy. And now you're introducing these extra measures, because what would have been passed, and I'm dealing with an issue at the minute, what would have been passed in June or July of this year is now getting refused in terms of some of the policy tests, in terms of cluster and in terms of infill and gap sites. So for 5 years or so, councils have went down this route of interpreting. So you cannot say that the PPS 21 states sustainable development in the countryside, but still in all, these measures, if introduced and adhered to, will certainly restrict opportunities. And you know, Angus, from the start, the reason why we use these extra caveats was to create opportunities for people to reside in the countryside. And it seems to me now you're adding those additional measures and policy tests. That's certainly going to impact, and you've heard what the Ulster Farmers Union said, you've heard what the Mid-Ulster Council and many others have said. So I do think these are changes, and I would certainly ask for the Minister and the Department to take it back to the Minister to withdraw the plan itself and have open and meaningful discussion with local authorities and see how it's going to impact on rural communities. But I clearly see this, if not a policy change, there are extra policy test measures that's introduced for councils to interpret.
Okay, Angus.
Well, I mean, I understand here and note the comments, but I mean, I'm going to have to repeat myself again that you know our view and the Minister's view is that these are not new policy tests or new policy. It's clarifying the existing policy and the correct interpretation of the existing policy, and that's really what we're trying to do in order to properly deliver on the objectives of the rural policy and the SPPS, striking that balance between sustainable development and providing opportunities for rural communities, and also clarifying what is meant by that sort of cluster, group and consolidate approach that the policy advocates.
But I just the final point, Chair, because I mean obviously members made the point, but how can you say when you look at domestic garages, which was included in a policy test, are now looked at differently, or you include dwellings as opposed to, I mean, these are changes, and I mean, for 5 years these decisions have been made by council. So you can't talk about sustainable rural communities and put these restrictions in place. So you can't get council to go and make the decision, but by the way, this is the way to go about it. So I mean, you're not, the autonomy should lie with the local authority. So I think there's serious issues here going to raise, because you cannot ask councils to go and look at their local area plans and develop a number of units over 10 or 20 years and then introduce this plan and they're not going to meet those targets. So it's going to be an issue for them, and I think these are additional policy test measures that are being introduced.
Okay.
Well, we'll have to agree to disagree, Cal, on that. But I mean, I think fundamentally the councils do have that sort of ability to be able to attribute the weight to this plan, whether it's for decision taking or for doing their local development plans. So they do have that sort of judgment to make as councils.
Okay. Go to Roy now for a question, please.
Okay. In terms of the applications for new homes in the countryside, the Rural Community Network have given us a nice, neat graph of the planning statistics, and it does seem to be very stable between 2016 and 2021. If anything, just perhaps gone down between 2019-20 and 2020-21. But so my question is, what has triggered this new advice note, given that the applications to the countryside seem to be stable?
Well, I mean, I think that the as I sort of set out at the start, there was a process that we went through in terms of the call for evidence around rural policy some time ago now, and then also the consultants that looked into rural policy and undertook quite a lot of stakeholder engagement in 2017-18, and that really, I suppose, that highlighted that there were issues that with the way the policy was being implemented, and I think that's built upon as well by some of the work that we did in the department, sort of following on from that and the engagements that we would have had to understand how the policy was being implemented. And therefore, the purpose of this plan is simply to clarify what we would consider to be the correct understanding and of the policy, so that it can be applied, and to bring that sort of consistency as well, so there's an understanding across all the councils of really what the department and the minister means by the policy.
Okay. In terms of the requirement to integrate with existing buildings, is there any degree of understanding or flexibility shown when it can be demonstrated that where planners may want or limited options exist, potentially close to slurry tanks or middens, which would not be good for public safety, that or in fact that would have to be accessed through busy farmyards, totally impractical if there may be animals there, etc., or dangerous machinery. So is some degree of flexibility shown in such situations as you adopt the new policy?
Well, I mean, it's not really policy, and I suppose, as I said before, there is the health and safety considerations that would need to be also weighed into the planning authority's decision on particular cases. It's difficult, to preempt what that would be. Depends on the circumstance of the case, but as I said, there may be issues that would mean certain sites aren't going to be acceptable. From a health and safety perspective, so that they would not be appropriate. So I think that's certainly in there, and always has been.
Just trying to push that a little bit further. So you're saying that's not acceptable. So will a degree of flexibility be shown in perhaps other locations adjacent to the two buildings?
Well, I mean, it's I'm not sure flexibility is the right word. It's a case of the circumstances and the material considerations that apply to a site, no matter where it's located. So if there is a site which ticks a number of policy boxes, but actually is problematic from a health and safety perspective because of uses nearby, whether that's livestock or whatever, or even if it's because of other matters like flooding or accessibility issues, you have to weigh them all, and whilst it might pass quite a few tests, it may not pass them all, and then the planning authority needs to make a judgment as to whether or not it's appropriate to go ahead with that site or not, and that would I would make the planning decision in accordance with that.
In your planning advice note in paragraph 16, and I quote, "Department guidance was issued in the past for situations where there were no buildings on the farm, including holdings which may have had at least a residential dwelling and garage. This guidance was subsequently withdrawn." Can you advise me when it was published originally and when it was withdrawn?
I'm not sure. I'm looking to Joy and Philip to help me out here, and if not, we can certainly come back to you with the specific dates.
It would have been under the unitary system when it was withdrawn, so I think it was around maybe 2014, but that it would have been withdrawn, yeah.
Okay. Do you accept that you've contributed to your own difficulty and confusing, having issued some advice which you then withdrew?
Well, I suppose that was some time ago now, and in a different context. It was in the unitary system before we moved to the two-tier system. But I suppose I wasn't personally involved at that point. But if it was, it probably wasn't an ideal scenario. I think from memory that was brought about as a result of a legal case that highlighted an issue, and then a decision was taken to withdraw that guidance.
And then finally, at paragraph 16 in your advice note, it's indicated that you're concerned about creating or adding to ribbon development or potentially creating further future infill opportunities. What evidence have you that has been happening?
Well, I mean, we suppose we have a certain awareness of the issues I've said before in relation to the issues with the application of the policy, which is flowing from the call for evidence, the work that the consultants did, and some work that we've done ourselves in terms of understanding, decision making in the intervening period, and also just in terms of general engagement with council heads of planning and planners as well, to understand what some of the issues are. But I suppose the key thing is that we need to, the point we're I suppose making there is that it's important to avoid the unwanted consequences of that happening, which is what the policy is designed to do. So really we're about trying to clarify how that can be achieved so that we don't end up with that scenario.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, right. And finally, I'm just going to check, does George Robinson have a question? Because I know he has had trouble with the hand up icon. George, do you have a question?
Yes, Chair. Yes, and I'd like to thank Angus for the presentation so far. My point would be in relation to the area plan. Is there any point in having local area plans if the department will not allow them to diverge from the previous policy statement? And from Causeway Coast and Glens, which I represent, there hasn't been an area plan for quite a long time. I was just wondering if and when the next area plan would come to fruition in our area.
Well, I do know that the council is working on an area plan for Causeway Coast and Glen. I'm not sure. Again, maybe going to look to Philip and Joy in case they know just what stage that is at. Because there's 11 plans going forward across all the different council areas, and some are at more advanced stages than others. With Belfast being kind of in the late. Joy, can you help me here?
I can just let you know that they are progressing their draft plan strategy at the minute, so that hasn't yet been published, but I'm not sure of the actual time frame for it.
Okay, so that means that they're at the stage where they're still working on it, and then the next stage is when they've completed that, they'll put that through to the department to cause an independent examination into the soundness of the plan. That'll be the next step on that.
Right, thanks for that, Angus. But one other wee question that I have for you is that there was an assessor was brought in from Scotland to assess the Causeway Coast and Glens council's people. I was just wondering if that has come to fruition yet. If there's any feedback on their findings.
I think I know what you're talking about, but I think that was an arrangement made by the council. It wasn't something that we had done in the department. So you need to check with the council to see whether that process is complete.
Are you saying you have no knowledge of it?
I was aware that there was something going on, and I think it may be one of my kind of former chief planner colleagues from Scotland who was doing it, Jim McKinnon. But it wasn't something that we had asked for, or I don't know what the outcome of it is, or even if it has completed yet.
Yes, I think the chair did mention the word flexibility, and that seems to imply with Causeway Coast and Glens area that there's quite a lot of complaints that I would get, from constituents that things are just a wee bit too rigorous from a planning point of view. Okay. And I think that needs seriously addressed. And probably it's not just Causeway Coast and Glens, right? I'm sure right throughout the planning system, throughout Northern Ireland. Okay. The planners, in my opinion, should be looking for solutions, not trying to stop the application.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Noted.
Okay. Thank you. And listen, in closing, can I thank the officials? Can I thank Angus, Joy, and Philip for coming to the meeting this morning? We do look forward to further engagement with you. One point that hasn't been mentioned in the meeting was something that I, as chair, am acutely aware of, having met with Hydrogen NI and other hydrogen representative groups, that there is a concern going forward that obviously there's huge potential for the Northern Ireland economy, particularly around green hydrogen, and their concern is that it'll take a length of time for planning to catch up with the needs and requirements of the industry, and therefore hampering our ability to harness this huge potential for renewable. So what I would say is that a strategic planning policy in hydrogen is something that is being talked about. It's something that perhaps at a later date, Angus, you or your team could come back to us regarding the potential or solutions going forward to ensure that we have adequate engagement before such times as there really becomes a direct need.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm kind of thinking that the process we've already started on, Chair, on reviewing planning policy for renewable and low carbon development may provide us with an opportunity to actually look at that, which would be great, and enable that to be sort of, considered as part of that process.
Okay. Thank you for that. Can I thank the three of you for coming along to the committee this morning? Thank you.
Chair,
Thank you.
Audrey could send a message. He was trying to come in, but his audio mustn't be working. Or his mic.
Mustn't have put his hand up.
Sure. He's obviously having problems.
Apology. We'll come back on that. I think maybe a couple of members are having problems with that.
Yeah.
Apologies, members online. If I'm not picking you up, it's because there's no hand up icon. The only hand up icon in which I received was actually Cahill's, and also George had indicated that he couldn't get that. I wasn't aware that Patrick had, so apologies for overlooking in that instance. And only the officials had left before it was brought to my attention. Members, look, I know we're going towards our strategic planning here, but look, you've all heard the significant briefing there that we had from the planning officials, and I think I'd just like to say in relation particularly to the planning advice note, I think this committee has handled this issue very, very maturely to date. When we first became aware of this, we wrote out to all relevant stakeholders, whether that's councils or any interested body. We've had a body of information coming back, overwhelmingly have severe issues with this planning advice note. We give the Minister an opportunity here at committee to explain the policy, and also her advice that the regional planning Director of Regional Planning Officer, Mr Angus Kerr, would be with us to give us a briefing on that. We've now had that, and I have to say considerable concerns remain, and I think that's from every member around this, and I actually don't think this is targeted towards the particular minister. I actually think this is more to do with officials and the reasoning behind this planning advice note. So what I want to say is that you heard through my questioning that there was a call for evidence, but there was no actual consultation on this plan. And alarmingly, one of the starkest bits of information we have here is that the call for evidence was over 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago. So I still have considerable concern. Today, when the Director of Regional Planning, Mr Angus Kerr, came along to the committee, was asking him about specifically CTY8, in which this plan relates to, and we couldn't get clear answers on that. So what I'm going to suggest here, if I feel the room is with us on this, which I suspect they are, is I think as a committee that we should now be calling for the rescinding of the planning advice note, and until such times as there has been adequate consultation with the relevant stakeholders. I think there's too many grey areas here, and it has potential legal ramifications for many councils if not addressed, and addressed swiftly. That would be my suggestion, and I'll take views from the room. So Liz first.
Chair, no, I would support that, and obviously I'd actually asked Angus that as part of my engagement with him, because I think, whenever I'd asked him about what engagement they'd had with councils prior to them issuing the advice note, it was clear that there was none. So I would certainly support that proposal.
Okay. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. I think there's two aspects around this. We'll come on to the strategic planning thing after this, but planning is a key issue for this committee. There's other issues obviously within infrastructure, but I think planning is a key issue, and we shouldn't just leave it here today in relation to the plan. I think we should be inviting the Ulster Farmers Union, for example, and Rural Community Network in to understand the issues that they've outlined, and so we shouldn't just leave it here. I am conscious there's a debate tabled for the plenary next Tuesday in relation to the proposal you've just made, and I think we should give place to the other place in terms of determining the position of the Assembly in relation to whether we want the plan withdrawn or not. So I would be hesitant for us to be taking a decision now in advance of what the situation is in the Assembly next week. But I do think we should be, very soon, be inviting the Ulster Farmers Union, Rural Community Network in, and all the rest of it. Okay,
and I will say in relation to that, the committee has been dealing with this now for some time. Members from all parties have put on record their concerns in relation to this. I think the main point for me would be that in terms of time, to have all of the representative bodies come before us is actually going to be quite difficult given the time restraints. We have written to them all, we have responses from them all, and overwhelmingly they're in agreement with many of the concerns of this committee. That's why I would still be suggesting we go down the road of asking to rescind this planning advice note to allow for adequate consultation with stakeholders. But your point's on the record, and I know you're at difference with maybe the approach. I'll go on to other members that maybe have a question. Dolores?
Sure, it does. Obviously, there are concerns, given that there is a debate coming up in the Assembly where it'd be useful to hear back from the Minister in terms of some of the concerns that have been outlined here today. Could I be clear in terms of under the motion? Suggestion is about rescinding PAN altogether, but you've also then said put a halt to it. You know, it's a bit of a technicality.
So I suppose my proposal is, and it's in the back of actually Roy's evidence, that they can withdraw guidance. My proposal is we withdraw the planning advice note to allow the department to have adequate time to consult with stakeholders, and following that engagement with stakeholders, if there is deemed necessary, then the department can proceed with an evidence base. I'm concerned, as chair of the committee and indeed a member of this committee, that we don't have the relevant evidence, and therefore we're actually have put the cart before the horse in relation to the issuing of it. That's where I stand, and I hope that maybe gives a bit more clarity on that point. Anybody else wish to come in? No, I don't have any else. So, okay, so look, I have a proposal, and it was seconded by Liz at the committee. I know Andrew's different. If that's a proposal that you wish that we don't.
No, you're okay, Chair. Look, I think it's important to outline my position in relation to this. I think SPSS, of which the PAN is based upon, is an agreed policy, and is something that was agreed by all, if not the majority of parties in this place many time ago. Okay, so I think it's important that that is upheld, because it is about protecting the environment and the context within that. I am fully cognizant of the concerns that have been expressed in relation to, for example, the mortgage issue and financing, and also in relation to health and safety. I don't know whether withdrawing the PAN is the silver bullet that everyone's making it out to be, because the argument is very clearly made that it isn't a change of policy, and also that it is up for the councils to make their own interpretation in relation to this. And I was looking forward to the debate in the chamber next Tuesday, where we could have a considered debate in relation to this and a ministerial response. But if the motion is going forward, the committee here today, I probably would want to maybe perhaps dissent from if there's going to be a decision in relation to that.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to come in on that, I mean, I think if we're saying that, I think it's just to allow for that engagement, because that's where the concerns lie. I mean, I'm not satisfied with the response we've got here today. It's clarifying. In fact, it gives me more questions, because, as I said earlier, it's very contradictory, and I think that all needs to be ironed out. The reality is the feedback on the ground and from the councils is far from what the officials have said here today in terms of it being a helpful advice note. So obviously the motion table is from our party, so I think we can do both. Yeah. I think it's sending a message from the committee, and we can debate that next week too.
I think that fairly acutely puts forward my point that these two, the motion in the Assembly and the advice from this committee, they're not contradictory. I think it's important that this committee is clear on its concerns, and I think by asking for this to be rescinded or withdrawn until such times as adequate consultation actually strengthens the hand of the motion, and also the Minister's hand in providing that clarity in relation to information. We could also include within that motion, if members were in agreement, that we also issue a press release from the committee explaining the rationale behind our position, to allow then, because obviously we've asked for representation from many different councils and other organisations, and it would be fair that the committee now responds given the evidence that it's heard and how it's come to its position. So that's I think I have a hand up online. Roy, do you have a point in the room?
The other thing that does strike me is that any individual who went in good faith to make a planning application, yes, and spent money and perhaps underwent expensive surveys, etc., have had the goalposts changed during this. And I think at the very least, those who had applications in prior to the recent planning advice note should be dealt with under the previous system.
Okay, thank you. And Cahill, please, online.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. No, I would agree with that approach, Chair. I mean, clearly you've hit it on the head in terms of, I understand Andrew's point. If this was evidence-based, but I mean, the council's only received this, the SPPS and the PPS 21 in 2015 when they took over themselves. So they'd only been running for a year. So, if it was evidence-based that there was serious issues out there, that isn't clearly, and you asked the question today, so I'm happy enough to go with the proposal in terms of withdrawing and have meaningful conversation and discussion with local authorities and other interested bodies to find out exactly, because we've no stats, there's nothing out there suggesting that, there's been overwhelming growth in the countryside in terms of dwellings.
Okay, yes, and I thought that was a very interesting point from Roy, actually, regarding the rural network in relation to the graph and the stability as to what provoked the change. So I think everyone's in agreement on the point. Okay, did I have Patrick or George? No, I'm not seeing any. No.
Chair, I'd have to dissent. I mean, I would prefer to hear back from the Minister.
Well, we'll put the proposal and we can say. So the proposal on the table is that this committee asks for the department to rescind the planning advice note pending an adequate consultation with stakeholders, and also releases a press release clarifying its position, given that we have already placed on record, or we've already asked many to respond to us. So are members in agreement with that proposal, proposed by myself and seconded by Liz Kimmins? We will have dissent, so could members please raise their hand in support of the motion or against? So support we have, do you want to count, Clerk? So we have 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so we have Roy Beggs, Liz Kimmins, Jonathan Buckley, Patrick Delargy, Cathal Boylan and George Robinson. David's not in the room, so he's not. Okay, and those against? Okay, so we have Dolores and Andrew. Okay. Okay, the motion is carried, and what we will do is the clerk will pull together a press release and issue that to members before being issued on out today. Okay, thank you, members. We will move on now to agenda item number 9, which is the forward work programme. Can I draw members' attention to the proposed draft work programme for the next meeting? At page 115, the draft forward work programme. Members will have further opportunity to discuss this shortly when we break for strategic planning. Agenda item number 10, which is any other business. Have members any other business to raise? Now, I do know that Andrew has raised with officials in relation to the Minister of Infrastructure to request that she intends to publish, or when she intends to publish, the following research for active travel and model shift, electrification of transport, greening of the public sector fleet and alternative fuels in transport sector. I have no problem with that suggestion that we can write and ask when that intends to be published.
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry I'm speeding, member, here because we're late for our next session.
Sorry, Chair, just a quick one. I'd actually meant to raise it under correspondence about the electric vehicles. It's just around, because obviously we've had a lot of issues around the on-street residential charge point scheme. Can we write to the department to ask if they will assist councils in applying for the scheme? Because that was one of the things we'd said, that there wasn't a lot of uptake, and if we could maybe get further information into the action group that's being set up on e-charging and the work done so far.
Are members content with those couple of action points? Agreed? Great. Dolores?
But not so much any other business, Chair, but next week I'll be leaving the committee. I just want to place on record my thanks to the officials for all of their cooperation and advice and help over the course of the last period of time, and indeed to other committee members, because I do know many, if not all, members are actually very supportive of infrastructure as a key economic driver and recognise the importance of it in tackling climate change. So just thanks to colleagues.
Dolores, can we thank you for your service to the committee? No doubt you'll still be a robust advocate in the chamber on all things infrastructure. So we'd just like to thank you for your contribution at the committee, and we look forward to working with you in whatever other role that you take on from this. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Okay, members, thank you. So agenda item number 11, which is date, time and location for next meeting. The next meeting will take place at 10 a.m. Wednesday the 20th of October 2021 in room 29 Parliament Buildings. Can I advise members of the need to maintain social distancing while leaving the meeting, and to ensure that they remove all their own papers, water bottles and glasses, etc. from the meeting room when they leave. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, members.
Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme